Hi, everyone. I'm the Marvelous Patrick. Welcome to Thing I Love. This episode, my guest is James Lambert. James is a filmmaker, a documentarian, and we got to know each other back when we both were teaching at the Minneapolis Media Institute. And the thing James loves it's a movie, and it's called 24-Hour Party People. I got the title right, which is something I have trouble doing the entire episode. So just heads up, I suck. But no, we don't just talk about that, but we end up talking about the whole idea of what documentary, film, and biopics, and the idea of truth versus accuracy versus fact versus storytelling, and all these cool issues surrounding that. As well as we talk about James's latest film called Conspiracy Theorists Lie. The links and everything, of course, down in the about section for this episode. So without any further ado, here's James Lambert. We met teaching together at the Minneapolis Media Institute way back that's 10 years ago.
Yeah,
2010. And I was the writing teacher, and you were everything else.
I was watching the library and doing like the media history stuff.
Yeah, and then eventually we grew and we took over, and then eventually the whole thing fell apart. Because we weren't allowed to take over as much as we wanted to. I want to point out. It was when we lost power that the wheels came off the entire school and it closed. But when we were in charge, it was actually doing quite well.
Yes, it was all corporate decisions.
Yeah. They got in our way, and well, it serves them right, I guess. I failed. But besides teaching everything else, you are also a filmmaker. And you're best known for a documentary. You're a documentarian, obviously, but probably the big thing you were known for when we met was the First Avenue documentary, right?
Yeah, well, that's the biggest thing I've done was about First Avenue. But I did work on a film that went to Sundance before that called TV Junkie. And now, have you watched Tiger King?
I have not.
So Tiger King is like the big rage, all of a sudden it just pops up the number one on Netflix.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. So Rick Kirkham, the guy that we did TV Junkie about, is in Tiger King.
Oh my gosh! That's crazy.
Yeah. So he's like starting to get noticed again, and then that like draws attention to the film we made.
So what I'm hearing is then there's going to be a sequel, right? Right? I mean, that's you gotta strike while the iron is tepid is what I always say. So, all right. Well, today I'm so happy that you're able to join us, like the audience and me, for sharing something you love. And what is it you're going to share the love about today?
So I'm going to share what I usually say is my favorite film, 24-Hour Party People.
Okay. What is 24-Hour Party People about? Let's start there. What's the synopsis, the Wikipedia for it or whatever?
So the quick synopsis is it's the music scene in Manchester, England from 76 to the early 90s. So that's the quick synopsis. The more detailed thing is that there are three main people. And on some of the posters, and if you look at the soundtrack, you'll see there's one guy named Ian Curtis. And on the poster, he's labeled as genius. There's one guy named Sean Ryder. He's labeled as poet. And then there's a third guy named Tony Wilson, and he's labeled as twat.
That's not something I would want on my business card, probably.
Yeah. So it's the story of a genius, a poet, and a twat in this musical era.
Okay. And how did you discover it? How did you get into it?
So I had no idea what it was about. I had seen like a little ad or something, but it didn't really tell you anything. And I just thought, 24 Hour Party People, it sounded like it would be like a Studio 54 kind of thing to me. And it ended up being kind of music related, but not really exactly that. And then when I put it on, I was just floored from the get-go. The very first scene, this is Tony Wilson was a real TV reporter. And so they start with a real TV show that he was doing, but it's an actor pretending to do what he did. And it's the late 70s. So what's that, like hang gliding? Where
Yeah.
they jump off the side of a hill and see how far they can go. And he did that for television. And so, and right off the bat, he goes, so I'm gonna jump off the side of this cliff. I haven't had any training. Don't know if I'll make it, And he jumps off the cliff, and he flies for a bit, and he's like, this is great, better than sex. And he crashes into this field, and he's like, oh, that was great. I'm really hurt, and I'm definitely going to do it again. And you're just like, oh, that's not funny. But then he turns and looks at the camera, and he's been a TV reporter, so he's been kind of looking at you, but now he like very much breaks that fourth wall, and he's the narrator of the film. And he's like, okay, that really happened. The real Tony Wilson did that. But it's kind of an analogy for the whole film. I'll just say one word, Icarus. If you know what I'm talking about, good. If you don't, that's fine. You'll still enjoy the film, but maybe you should read more. And I was just like so hooked. I was like, he's so smart and smarmy, and it's just so.
And he does dumb things.
What?
And he's smart, but he does dumb things?
Yes. Yeah, he prides himself on that he is Cambridge educated, and yet he's doing just these stupid TV bits. And so the real Tony Wilson goes on from there, and he starts booking back acts at a club, getting into the movie scene, into the music scene, and then he starts a record label called Factory Records. And for a while, he's got all the hot artists on his record label. And then he opens up a club called the Hacienda, and it becomes the biggest, hottest club in Manchester. But just like the opening scene, you can only fly for so long before it all just comes crashing down. Everybody's doing drugs and spending money faster than it's coming in, and it all just falls apart. But it's a wild ride on the way to get there.
So, being the gist of the show is love, things you love. Why do you love this? I mean, besides the fact that it sounds hilarious,
Yeah.
Obviously you loved it enough that like I think there was like almost no hesitation. I said, hey, you want to do it on a show? What do you want to talk about? And you're like, this is the thing. This is my favorite film. So talk about why you love this film.
So it might not be everybody's favorite film, but me watching just so many films over the years and teaching about so many films, this one just stands out as doing things that I'd never seen before. I mean, people break the fourth wall here and there, but this film just goes way beyond that and is so conscious of what it's doing and letting you in on the secret that I just love it every time I watch it. There's literally a point where one of the things that Tony Wilson, the real Tony Wilson, did is he hosted Wheel of Fortune when it became a game show in England. And so they show him on the game show rattling off the stuff, about philosophizing about life. And then they cut to the director in the studio booth saying, just go from, hello, I'm Tony Wilson, to spin the wheel. Cut out all that crap. And then they go back to Steve Coogan, who's playing Tony Wilson, and who can be very hilarious. And he's pointing at the guy you just saw as the director, complaining about Tony Wilson. And he says, that guy playing the director, that's the real Tony Wilson, the real me, the guy I'm playing in this film.
That's great.
Yeah, it's like there's so many levels of stuff going on that it doesn't make any sense, and yet it makes perfect sense.
I can, it almost feels like kind of like The Room, right? Or then the Disaster Artist that comes after it, which it's all mishmashed together. It almost, I mean, it feels like reality kind of bleeds into itself.
Yes. There's even a point where they show a scene of something happening. They show the Tony Wilson's first wife cheating on him with somebody else. And then the real guy that allegedly cheated with Tony Wilson's wife is in the film, and he looks at the camera and says, "I don't remember that happening." And then the narrator says, both the ex-wife and this guy insist that we tell you they said this never happened. But I believe with John Ford, print the legend. And so they tell you a probably fake story, but then tell you it's probably fake, but it was so good we had to put it in the film.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that idea. So
yeah, it really plays with what is history and what's really going on.
So as a documentary filmmaker, and this is something I remember we would talk about in my memoir class, right? Is the idea of what is factual versus what is true.
Yes.
And it sounds like this really plays with that idea. We talk about, like there's the facts, like this happened on this date with these people, but then there's the truth of, I remember, they felt like this, or they looked at me like this, then it kind of gets into the more emotional or metaphysical versus the physical. And it sounds like this really plays with those themes as well.
Yes, it does. And really, I think it really captures the essence of a certain time and place. Like I feel like I really know it, but then I question if I know the facts of what happened.
So has there been like any other, I mean, obviously this is supposed to be like this documentary, which we don't know how much is true, what's accurate, probably the best word for it. But is there any other like collaborating evidence or anything else that's come out through the years to go along with this, or has any other versions of this story occurred?
Yeah, there is a film called Control that focuses on just Ian Curtis, one of those three guys, the genius. There is some documentaries about New Order, the band, which Ian Curtis was the frontman for Joy Division, and then he killed himself, and the rest of the band went on to be New Order. And so there are some documentary and some fictionalized versions of these stories, and there are some people who've written books on the subject. But even there, like, I haven't read it, but apparently Tony Wilson wrote a book. Oh, should have turned that off. Even Tony Wilson wrote a book, apparently, where he also deliberately plays with the truth and puts in stories that he thinks sound good, but aren't necessarily what happened.
As Obi-Wan Kenobi was known to say, the truth depends on your point of view from time to time. And I think that especially when we talk about things like memoirs and documentaries and things like that, there is always, the artist brings in that level of, this is my truth. And the audience also brings in a level of accepting and not accepting of that truth and finding their own truth. Talk more about then the filmmaking of 24 Hour People. Stylistically, what's it like visually?
Visually, it's pretty straightforward. I can't think of any really unusual shots or really unusual editing. It's more of that kind of theatrical thing of the character coming out of the story. It's very much like Iago character in Othello. We're very much following kind of his version of it, and he's coming out to tell us his thoughts and feelings on what's going on. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward in the way it's shot.
I'm trying to figure out where the timeline is for you for discovering 24 Hour People and its impact on yourself as a filmmaker.
It's more impacted on things that I definitely want to try to do, but I would need a bigger budget than my little.
Don't we all?
Yes. I mean, in the Conspiracy Theorist Live that I did, I had somebody film me interacting with people, but I haven't done that kind of breaking the fourth wall where you're seeing me in something and then stepping out of that to be with you, the audience, and then back into it. And I would like to incorporate that because I think it can work really well in documentaries. There's a documentary that I really love by Werner Herzog called Little Dieter Needs to Fly. And little Dieter grew up in Germany, wanted to be a pilot, but Germany was decimated after World War II, so he had to come to America to be a pilot. And when he finally got to be a pilot, he was with the Navy, and he got shot down in Vietnam, and he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for America. So he went from starving as a child in Germany in the war to starving in Vietnam fighting for, another country just because he wanted to fly. But
this is why they have the term Schadenfreude. This is exactly
yeah.
why.
And Herzog does this really interesting thing where he hires some locals in Thailand to pretend they're the Vietnamese, ties little Dieter's hands behind his back, and has the Thai guys walking through the woods, like simulating what happened when he got captured. But then he's talking to us, almost kind of being interviewed, but kind of reenacting what happened and telling us what happened. And I would like to play with that kind of stuff in documentary, where you're not altering the story of what happened, but you're giving people a fun way of interacting with it. Just like, well, wait a minute, this isn't the real thing. He's telling us about it, but it looks like the real thing.
Well, and that gets into the idea too of, like the biopics, right? Like, if you watch, there was the Bohemian Rhapsody one, which everyone thought was, people seem to really enjoy, but the accuracy is like, they say, well, they didn't do like that thing at that performance, and they went to have been like this, and you think about like the difficulty. Steve Jobs is this mythic figure in American culture, and there was the Ashton Kutcher movie, and then the Sorkin Fassbender one, and even Pirates of Silicon Valley back in the 90s. But none of these things have really been able to be, capture that truth or that accuracy. They all kind of have their problems, and which is really interesting, because Sorkin especially was saying he's going to take his I don't have my words. Sorkin said he was going to basically use the Isaacson book about Jobs, which was like the biography and everything. And how does this this gets us to the idea of the concept of truth is malleable, and how much of it is storytelling, the great let the legend live, versus is the truth enough to satisfy us as an audience? And I think that's a hard question to answer. I mean, I think it depends maybe on the topic. Maybe sometimes the truth needs a little help.
Sometimes I think it does. I also think that most people who make a film have something they want to say, and so it becomes about something. I'm not sure. I love the Sorkin Steve Jobs film, but I haven't actually heard him speak about it. I have heard him speak about The Social Network, which he wrote, and he very consciously was making that more of a statement about our times than a look at Mark Zuckerberg.
Sure, and I don't know if you've seen the Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood film, with Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, but all the media and press about it, kind of coming up to it, it made it look like it was about Mr. Rogers.
Right.
And it's a great movie, but it is not. It's about more the philosophy of Mr. Rogers than about Mr. Rogers as a person.
Yes.
So at that point, you kind of start to wonder, well, and this is something I think a lot of artists would have is, I am my work is me, but they are also separate things. And
I think that gets into the unanswerable questions kind of category.
Yeah, and that's the fun of art, right? Is is where is the artist, where is the audience, and where is the person? Right? Where is Steve Jobs the person, start and end, versus where does Ashton Kutcher start and end, versus where is the director's vision? Especially the more people you bring into it. And I think a lot of people often take the idea of documentary as documenting in a very literal sense. I think they always, I think, if you ask your average person watching, they'd say, well, it's a documentary, it's fact, it's what happened, right? Not seeing that it's also storytelling.
Right. And those questions have been there from the beginning. I usually show clips of a silent film, Nanook of the North. It's made by this guy Flaherty, who made these kind of outdoor adventure kind of documentaries. And he's the first person that somebody applied the word documentary to. And so Nanook of the North, in some ways, could be seen as the first documentary. And it goes up to the Eskimo village, and it sees how they live, and it films them in the igloo, going to bed at night, and it films them going out hunting and stuff. But then you find out, if you read about it, that, well, one thing, the cameras just weren't that good in the 1920s. So you couldn't film in an igloo. So they had to build half an igloo and then film them, outside, pretending to go to sleep. And you say, well, that's okay, because just the technology was, not so good. It's the only way we could see what it looked like inside the igloo. But then he's like, we want to see you spearfishing, we want to see you spearfishing the seals. And these guys are like, we have rifles, like our grandparents spearfishing. Like, these seals are dangerous. But he convinced them to go out there with spears and try to hunt these seals. And it wasn't really the life that they were living at the time, but it's what the American audience would think of as the Eskimo doing. And so, at what point are you documenting? At what point are you making up your own story? It's been there from the very beginning.
So to bring it back now to 24-hour people, 24-hour party people. 24-hour people. Yeah, not just people, 24 hours. 24-hour party people. Yeah, that is quite the title too. It's a great title. Where do you, because obviously there's the character, there's the actor, but there's also the director. Did he also direct it? The documentary about himself that also is being acted by him?
No.
So where does the director come in on this?
I don't know, because I've seen a couple of other works of that same director, and he's done some experimental stuff, but nothing. It's like he just came up with a whole new style for 24-hour party people.
You said it was the genius, the poet, and the twat.
The twat.
Who was who in this whole?
Okay, so the genius is Ian Curtis, and he was the front man for, originally they were called Warsaw, and they were called Joy Division, and then he hung himself right before they were about to make it big, and the rest of the band went on to become New Order, which became a really big band in the 80s.
Yeah.
So he was the genius, and he's up through about the middle of the film, and then he dies off. And then comes in the poet, who is Sean Ryder he's the front man for the Happy Mondays. And they're actually the ones who have the song 24-Hour Party People, like is the title of the film. And Sean Ryder was, a poet, was a lead singer, wrote these great lyrics. He was also a big-time drug addict who just would totally lose sight of the real world with his obsession for drugs. And so that ran out a lot of the company's money just trying to keep him going and keep him making albums. And all through this is the twat, which is Tony Wilson, who is narrating the story and bringing us through this kind of evolution from the first time Tony Wilson saw the Sex Pistols play in 1976 until his company went bankrupt in the early 90s. It's kind of this whole history of music and how it all kind of centered around him, but he wasn't the driving force of it. There's even a point in the film where we see his first wife, she leaves him, and then we don't see any relationships for a while. All of a sudden he walks into a room and he's like, here's a mobile phone for you. And it's a huge, 80s mobile phone. and the woman's like, what am I going to do with that? He's like, just keep it on you. And there's some kids running around, and he looks at the camera and he goes, okay, I probably should have told you that I got remarried and I had children, but that's not really what this is about. I'm a minor character in my own story. And so,
Ouch.
yeah, it all centers on Tony Wilson, but it's not really about him. He's just pulling these forces together.
The Wilson, like you said, he's the minor character, but it's all revolving around him. So how did this movie come to be? How did he? Is he a producer of it, or as well, or how did this happen?
I
I
don't know how
there should be a movie about you.
I don't know how involved he was, but I do know that he was quite a popular figure in England. I mean, he was the host of Wheel of Fortune for a while, and so just kind of mainstream England knew him. And then he was, doing this cutting edge music, and so, the real hip part of England knew him, and people knew him as different things, and so people wanted to kind of see that story all together.
Your latest film, I remember when you were making this film, and way back when, and doing all these different pieces, and it's called Conspiracy Theorists Lie, and it's available to stream right now on Amazon if you're a Prime member, which yes. I am, but I have a copy anyway. Whatever. I was cool before. Hipster credit. But tell people what this is about. How you got this whole thing. I mean, you're very big on debunking conspiracy theories, which must keep you very busy these days.
Yeah, I'm very interested in conspiracy theories and how they affect society. And I made this film about the Kennedy assassination, which when I was a kid, I grew up thinking there was a conspiracy and, watching movies, reading books and all that. And at some point I went to Dealey Plaza for myself and I changed my mind. Things just did not look the same as the way they had been presented to me. So I started studying the real facts. And so on the 50th anniversary, which was back in 2013, I went down there, had a couple of guys film me interacting with people, why they believe this stuff. I handed out these little booklets, like little come to Jesus booklets. It said Conspiracy Theorists Lie. And I just gave them some facts about why they shouldn't believe conspiracy theories. And a lot of people were very upset with me. I think they would have been more upset and probably would have gotten violent, but there were a lot of cops around that day. And so I made this film that goes back through some of the history of when did the American public first see the Zapruder film, which was in 1975 when a young Geraldo Rivera showed it on television. And I show you these things of how this kind of came into the public's consciousness. And then I show me interacting with people, and they repeat a lot of the things that I've already debunked. And you can just see how they're just so invested in those things that they have to believe they're true. And I think, it's very relevant to where we're at today, now that we have basically a conspiracy theorist in chief in the White House. That somebody who actually embraces these kinds of things and tells these kind of stories and either believes them or is pandering to people who believe them. I think it's important to see kind of how we've got here. And I do think that the Kennedy assassination is key to changing the public's mind. I mean, most people, if you say, do you believe conspiracy theories? They'll say, no, that's nutty. And they'll say, well, do you think JFK was, shot by conspiracy? And they're like, well, maybe, majorities still say yes to that. And so it opens up that door up to saying, well, yeah, this topic is generally nutty, but there's a few that are true. And I think people start really believing that after Kennedy. And now it gets to the point where, depending on what political side of the line you're on, you believe, that the Clintons are murderers and that George Bush caused 9/11 and that, it goes back and forth on just wherever you are, you're willing to grab this one or that one. Some of that I think is due to the internet, but some of that is due to the Kennedy assassination. So I'm hoping that if I can debunk the Kennedy assassination, I can make people relook at the other things they think they know.
One of the things that always really amazes me about conspiracy theories is there's kind of like this domino effect, right? Where if you kind of believe one, you end up believing another and another and another. But they all lead. This is the crazy thing. Like eventually every conspiracy theory somehow links it group-wise or somehow to people who believe in flat Earth and the moon landing is fake. And I mean, it kind of ends up being like that same group of people.
Yeah, I mean, the further you go down that road, the nuttier it gets. And Yeah, it is unbelievable the kind of things that they pull together as being, you know, it's almost you reach a point where it's because the rest of the public doesn't believe this, it must be true, and I must be the really smart one for knowing it.
I think that's part of it. There's this feeling of I'm a part of a club. I'm a member of a community. And I think the other piece of it is, I'm smarter than everyone else. I know the secret truth, right? But yeah, and it's because, it's right. It's if you believe in flat Earth, you definitely believe in the conspiracy of Kennedy and the moon landing is fake and anti-vaxxers and it's kind of like that's the root, and then like Kennedy and stuff like that. And then if you get this one, if you might just stay there, but if you get to this one, you believe all the ones that are above it too. And
Yes.
that's, I think, why it's so dangerous, is because also it's very easy to just go start sliding down that scale.
Yes, and it's very dangerous now. Like we saw some of this with Corona, that
it was caused by 5G towers.
Yeah, and and the idea that it was a hoax. That was the first talking point of Trump's supporters. And when you reach that point where you're defying reality because your political agenda says so, that's a really dangerous point.
Yeah, and I mean, I always have trouble just because the idea is always the simplest explanation is usually going to be the most likely. It's Occam's Razor, right? And
Right.
it's if the most simple explanation for like Kennedy is Oswald nut with a gun shot him. Right, the thing that was kind of concluded, and then but the more exciting thing, really cool and fun, would be the CIA and the this and the that, and you set this guy up as a pawn, and then this guy came in, took him, and it's fun.
Yes.
Right. That's the other part of it, though. Is kind of fun because that's right. Like that's way more exciting than some guy with a gun.
Right, and that's the thing is I love a good story. I love fiction films. I love fiction books, but I try to realize that there's a line there, that everything isn't fictional, and you can't just. There are some stories you shouldn't change the facts because it becomes a dangerous thing.
I totally agree. Well, again, they can stream it right now on Amazon Prime. It's called Conspiracy Theorists Lie. It's a wonderful film. I highly recommend everyone check it out. Rate it 5 stars, all the good stuff. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your frenemies. Just kind of make sure you kind of get everybody. And I can't wait for your next film with a bigger budget at some point. Start the kickstarting and all that, right? And get that going. But thank you so much for coming on today. Talk about, I'm going to get the name right, 24-hour party people.
Thank you so much for having me on.
What? Oh.
Thank you so much for having me on. And just this whole idea of doing something that people love. Not having another negative show.
Yeah, well, it's just the idea that we're all gonna, especially right now, and as this comes out, we'll be recovering from the COVIDs, and people are just gonna need. I'm hoping something. This will encourage people to find new things as well to check out. They're gonna 24-hour people. See, I almost had it. 24-hour party people. They'll check out your movie, right? And they'll check out the things other people are recommending. Coming up, there's been some games. There's a whole genre of Japanese television that another guest has, and there's going to be some music and some movies, and it's going to be. I hope people find new art to enjoy. That's really the goal, because we love these things and we want people to see them, and we're excited about them. And the rule of the show is you come on, you just talk about the good stuff about it, right? We don't. We're not going to do, I like Star Wars, but because that's not fun. We want to be happy and fun, and we love it. If you love something, you love it, warts and all. But we don't. If you want to share the love, you want to get someone else to love it. You don't tell them about the other stuff. So, James Lambert, filmmaker and Warehouse of One, thank you so much for coming on. Thing I Love.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching Thing I Love. I'm the Marvelous Patrick. For links on all the stuff we've talked about, as well as our guests, please check out the show notes below. And also, for extended interviews and more bonus features, please check out patreon.com/marvelouspatrick. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe and like buttons, please. Bye.